So just to begin with, can you tell us a little bit about your personal background? Where are you from? How did you start and what you're doing right now?
Yeah, so hopefully you can, yeah, there it goes. I think it froze for just a second. So Juliana Stancampiano, I have a very long history of where I'm from. I was born in Oklahoma, raised in Alaska primarily, and then Colorado for my high school years. Went to school in Texas, ended up back in Colorado, and then Europe for about 4 years. I was in Munich, Paris, and then London, and then over to Seattle, where I've been since 2008 and have lived the longest that I've lived anywhere in my life. I own a company called Oxygen. I started it in 2008 in Seattle, but it was originally a UK-based company, and I'll get into that probably a little bit later. Bought it in 2009 and have been running it since then. And I'm Native American, so the company is both Native American and woman owned and certified, and has been since I bought it. And that's probably the shortest overview of my life in a nutshell.
Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit unusual question. We don't really answer this, but I really want to know who did you dream to become when you were young?
Oh, that's funny. When I was young, I thought I was going to be a lawyer, and I envisioned myself living in a large city with no family and, becoming a very high-powered lawyer, and that just did not happen. But, from a role model standpoint, it was very interesting kind of growing up in Alaska probably as well. Definitely a different experience than other places. But I very much wanted to be a working woman of some sort and to be out on my own. And I didn't really have necessarily exact role models. My dad was a very amazing role model from a how you treat people in business perspective. He is the Native American part of my family and worked for the Bureau of Indian Affairs in Alaska. He ran the superintendency, and I watched him form relationships with all the different tribes in Alaska, and to run that agency in such a way that was very humanistic, which I think is not an easy thing to always do, especially within a government agency. And then my mom went back to school and was an educator and teacher, and I was one of four, so the last of four kids, and watched her kind of navigate that and the family throughout our lifetime. And she was probably one of my best coaches for managing money and teaching me cash positive balance, just by showing me the checkbook and explaining to me how my dad got paid and where all the money went, which it goes away very quickly for any of you that are in larger families. Just feeding and clothing and putting shelter over such a large family. And so I've always credited her with a lot of my financial acumen from a business perspective. So they both really, I would say, cultivated a lot growing up versus necessarily maybe what I wanted to be. They just said, do whatever you want to do. You can do anything. My mom was a pretty strong feminist, I think I would say at the time, both hippies. So I got a lot of that support from both sides.
No, that's an awesome story. And just to continue your story, so you told that there was a huge aspect of financial education in a way that has been given to you as a growing up person, as a teenager. What are some other things that maybe your parents gave you or you learned by yourself that you think became like the fundamentals, the foundation of what helped you to manage this business today?
I think creating relationships with people is probably one of the biggest things that I learned, from moving quite a bit and having to start over every time we moved. I moved twice in high school as well. And so, in my freshman year, I was new. My sophomore year, I was new. Those are pivotal moments when you have to figure out how to make new friends and, navigate a lot of things and people that you otherwise would have just known and been accepted or, kept going with friends, etc. They were both small towns as well, where a lot of people knew one another already. And that's hard to break in anybody that has had to do that before. But I think having to do that taught me a lot of survival techniques and how to create relationships when I didn't have any, and a lot about just myself and kind of that perseverance of figuring out the way to make it work. I'm also an extrovert, so it was important for me to have people around me. I think, we learn a lot of those life skills. And I think one of the things that I did learn along the way as well is to really lean into your strengths. We all have weaknesses, and I think we spend too much time trying to get better at what we're not as good at. And I would say from a business perspective, leaning into what you're strong at and then finding the people to surround you that are better at, that are good at your weaknesses is probably the biggest learning that I've had, the entire time. Don't try to teach yourself accounting and do your own books if that's not your strength. And I would say that's not my strength. That's why I said it. I am very good at managing budgets and managing overarching P&Ls and pricing and negotiations and that whole aspect. But if you want me to do reporting of the finances and all the different line items, I'm going to waste a lot of time trying to do that. So I think that's a little bit maybe long-winded of the question that you asked, but just knowing yourself before you get into business and what you're good at and what you're not good at, look back at all the different things that have happened and, make some lists. I did that. In fact, when I bought Oxygen, the first thing that I did was I went out and got a CFO, what we call a fractional CFO, somebody that's part-time, because I knew that the financial aspect of it and how to do the data modeling was not going to be my strength, but I could sell and market and create teams very quickly.
Oh, thank you for that. So just to get it on the example, for example, if I'm interested in virtual reality or artificial intelligence and I'm suck at coding, let's say it like this. And so, but I have a vision. Okay, I think that this idea that I have, it will change the way people think through this ideas through the technology, and I believe it will change our lives. So from what you would say, I should focus on my strengths, which is vision, that I should build this idea, build the business model around it so it could sustain. And my weakness is coding, so I will not be able to practically do that. So what I should do instead? I should find somebody who can do it for me.
Yep. Yes, and I would say go sell your vision first and see if somebody's willing to buy it. And put people in hypothetical situations. Don't tell them that they have to buy it. Just say, if you had the money to buy this, would you buy this? Would you actually put your money into this? Because I was told early on, and I think it's such great advice, but it doesn't matter how amazing your idea is, but if nobody puts money behind it, it's never gonna make it. And there's a lot of businesses you can look at that started off, like Airbnb is a great example. He was making branded cereal and doing all these things back when he first was trying to launch, but it was more of a surfing apartments, and he's been through so many different iterations of that until it landed on the one good idea, which was, enabling people to rent out their space that wouldn't necessarily be, in the position to be able to do that. But he went through a lot of different really bad ideas before that one came up, and he had a whole portfolio of all the credit cards he'd maxed out on all these different ideas. So track it, but be willing to pivot and open to feedback.
Okay, thank you. And let's go to team building. How do you find your team, and what advice would you give to us, the people who maybe are building a team right now?
Yeah, in my line of business, and I think most lines of business, your team is your most important asset. And I used to say a long time ago, if I have happy people, I'll have happy clients and I'll have a happy bank. Right. So out of those things comes the financial piece. If you focus on the financial aspect, you're probably going to break the other areas somehow. So try to not focus in just solely on that, but focus in on what it is that you're doing. And then building teams, it's an art, it's not a science. I wrote a book a lot about it. I think you've got to hire people, in my mind, for the values of what you want your company to emit, and not necessarily just for the skills that they bring you. You want them to be good, but people are teachable, people can learn. But the values and the moral side of things is way harder to teach, especially as we've all been ingrained primarily through birth to 18 years old. That's when the most formation happens from that standpoint. And getting people to change some sort of behavior from those perspectives is very difficult. So I heard a quote early on as well that always resonated with me, that we get hired for our resume and we get fired for who we are. And so don't just go get the person that has the resume that you think, oh my gosh, they're so amazing, because typically it just doesn't end up that way. So get to know who the person is, how they react to things, how they deal with things. And I think an essential component for today, especially, is the ability to collaborate and work together. With how fast our world is shifting and changing because of technology, I don't believe that the lone person who's just wildly smart, but, as they say, leaves a wake of, dead bodies behind them because they're not necessarily very nice or good to work with. I don't think that model can work with how fast we're changing. So you need everybody to be able to work together, listen to one another, give feedback, iterate, move quickly, be agile, and not get their feelings hurt if their idea isn't the one that makes it. Because when you work with so many people, it's not one idea that makes it through. It's a group forming of an idea that ends up emerging. That's typically way stronger than the one person's first idea, and being open to that. So I double down on teams right now. And I think the other thing that I've learned through time is it takes time. People take time, and you have to give them time, and they can't be hurried to get where you want them to be necessarily. And the conversations that you get a little frustrated maybe with having have to be had and have to be given the time to be had. So just kind of let that breathe and happen versus always being super uber focused on the thing that you're creating or what you're driving. They'll come along with you.
Okay, thank you. And what is your team size? How many people?
We have 13 full-time employees today and about 30 plus with contractors, and we are growing.
Okay, thank you. I have so many follow-up questions in my mind, but let's just make a step backwards, in particular in 2008. So how did your life look like maybe a couple of years before 2008?
Oh man, a couple years before 2008. I had taken a job. Well, so I'd moved to Munich, and then when I got there, I found a job with Microsoft. And I was traveling around to all the different offices, and I was working within a EMEA-based group, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And I was able to be wherever I wanted to be. Nobody cared where my location was, and I wasn't tied down to any one place. And so I did a lot of traveling. It became a joke about where I was at. Which office was I in today? I was having a lot of fun being young and unencumbered and able to travel. And so that's what it looked like a couple years before 2008. And then 2007, I got married. I married a Frenchman that I met while I was over there. And then at the end of 2007, I started working full-time with Oxygen. And Oxygen had originally been one of our clients at Microsoft. So I left, got married, and went to work for Oxygen in October 2007 in the UK. So we moved from Paris to the UK. It's a little bit of a whirlwind. I can keep going if that's the story you want. Where we went.
Okay, and what about, so how do you remember 2008 in particular? Because it's a very controversial time, right? It's like on the one side, we have a biggest financial crisis that humanity have ever seen, banks crashing, stock market crashing, stock brokerages close. People are just swollen by that. The real estate is crashed. And for other people, though, they found opportunities on how to they found in this like darkness of reality, they found a beam of light of opportunity that they perceived. Would you say you're in the group of one or two, the first or the second?
I was in the second. I think it was helpful to go through 2008 without I didn't have a family, or I didn't have kids, at least. I didn't have all these things that so many other people had, and then they lost their job or their house, and that was just terrible. I had a very small company at the time, a very small office here in Seattle, and we were growing. And so that was like the best case scenario in my mind through 2008. And I would say, and I think we're seeing this with the pandemic as we slowly come out of it. So much opportunity happens in the downfall that feels so soul crushing. And I would say it's the same thing with jobs and just life in general. Out of the bad, there, a lot of good can come. And if you keep your eyes open for it, it'll present itself. And so, I felt really fortunate. And then, in 2008 was an insane year. And I didn't own Oxygen at the time. I was managing the US office, and I was flying back and forth to the UK a lot. I became pregnant. So I was pregnant with my first child, and I was trying to both save the UK office and make that work, and also get the US office, off the ground and continued. And it was super hard. I just, I probably worked myself to the bone trying to make it all work. And what ended up happening is that I was a part of a lot of layoffs in the UK, or, helped to do that as the client work went away. But, it was a really close knit group of people, and it was so hard to do. It's like, you learn a lot in those moments about character and people and how you walk into that, and having a lot of empathy goes a long way. So that part was terrible. And I remember sitting at a conference and having to make the decision to put the UK office into bankruptcy because we couldn't pay the HMRC, which is their IRS, on the bill at that point, because of all the deals that just got pulled. And it was like overnight, and the UK was a lot worse than what was going on in the US. And so that was also an interesting dichotomy to watch and to go back and forth to, and see both sides. And but with that, as I said, the US office was like getting deals, and we were primarily doing a lot of sales learning, and the work that we were doing was really strong, and we were beating out a lot of other people that had been doing it for a long time, because companies felt like they needed something new and different because of the downturn, right? It was like, we have to really, really double down on our salespeople and figure out how to get out of this. So we were able to win a bunch of work supporting that, which made a huge difference. And so I was pregnant, and I thought I was going to have some maternity leave and all of those things. And all of a sudden, none of that was going to be happening. And at some point, I made the decision in that to buy the US portion out of their bankruptcy, which you actually can't really do of a UK company. So I learned a lot about UK law and business and how it runs and going through this process. But I ended up buying all of the US assets that I listed, and then I had to sign on to 1 year of employment liability for the UK employees, which is kind of scary because that can take you down really fast as a company. And these weren't really my employees, so that felt odd to take on that liability, but I didn't have a choice. So basically, if somebody came back and sued the company within the year post closing that office, I was liable for that suit. I went through many conference calls with UK lawyers and understanding how this works. And at one point, they also said, well, how do we know you haven't done this on purpose in order to buy the company for a small amount? And I'm sitting there like 8 months pregnant. And I said, well, if you could see me now, you would know that like the last thing I want to do is buy a company and like try to run it because I'm about to have a baby. And I think that probably scared them more than anything, my frankness. And so, and it went through in 2009, September 17th, the transaction went through, and then I had my son 2 days later on the 19th. So it was a whirlwind of kind of crazy times.
Well, that's just a very fascinating story. That's just heroic deed that you did. It's just very inspiring and very just all I'm out of words. I'm speechless. It's just okay, but let's so okay, so Oxygen, for the time that you bought it, what is the business model? What were you doing? Who were your clients, and what was your role after you bought it? What were you managing as the CEO?
Yeah, well, at first I was managing a transition from a UK company to a US company, and I don't. This is back in the days too of like not having everything in the cloud. In fact, we were some of the first users of the Microsoft Office 365, but I will tell you, back in the day, they used to call it BPOS, but I guess they decided that was a bad name for the Office suite, the online Office suite, but it was called Business Productivity Online Solutions. And we were some of the first customers of it in the cloud because that made a lot of sense to me after having gone through this transition between this Office where they had a server with all the information on it. And it took me a good 5 days to download everything. So, there was a lot of just like heavy lifting and kind of grunt work that I had to do to sift through all this stuff that I now owned and had to figure out what to do with it. And I had to really figure out what I'd bought, and that was interesting to go through. And then all of a sudden it was like, this is my company. I have to figure out what the vision is for it, and I have to figure out what we want to do. And so, we spent many months, and I've gone through so many iterations even just since then, but getting clear on what you want to be doing, how you want it to be, what values you want to have as a company, what's the vision for it. We spend a lot of time doing that. I have a services-based business. We primarily today do consulting, and a lot of our customers are primarily Fortune 1000, and we try to do some offshoots of that in order to just have that variety in some of the nonprofit work as well. Microsoft was a big client when we first landed, and that's a big reason why we opened the office in the beginning. And then have grown to a lot of the other companies that we all know here around Seattle, and then down into California, and then have just continued to grow over the years. But we've changed a lot. We started very steeped in highly experiential learning, and it was interesting because we used to sell based on like the content from a leadership development or communications or sales learning, and then I learned that it was really the experiential nature of what we were doing is why people were buying us. That's why I say, like, find out why people are buying what you have, because it might surprise you, their reasons. And so we let go of a lot of like the, IP or content side of things and really leaned into the experiential nature. And then, as we all know, the world changed so much. In around 2008, 2010, everything was going virtual. That was kind of the first online e-learning was happening, and all of that was being developed. And so we've gone through all those different iterations, and today we primarily do consulting for learning departments or sales enablement departments that are trying to modernize or change in large companies or going through mergers and acquisitions. And then we do a lot in that learning space, highly experiential still, just through many different modality types. And then we do creative services. So we have a whole arm of creative services that, for me, I always felt like, our learning assets should be just as interesting as our marketing assets. And that's not really the view that people have always had of it. So we've always had a back-end creative design and services, and we do UI UX work as well now. So those are kind of the four main components of our services that we do today.
Okay, thank you for sharing. And of course, that most definitely was really hard to manage all of that, especially with times you bought, as you said, you bought a business on 17th. You had your first child on 19th of September. How was your balance look like? How did you manage to balance out your personal life and the business?
I didn't do very well at first. My husband took my phone away from me multiple times. So I've gotten asked about balance and have talked about work-life balance many times over the years. And what I would say is that it's not the same for each individual person. And I think the important part as a leader is to understand what it is for your people, and not to judge them of what theirs is versus what yours is, and just say, okay, that's their, that's how they want to run their life. That's great. What I need to know as a leader is I need to know what it is for them. And if I know what it is, I can manage the business. I can manage, help them manage their time, help them prioritize their time, etc. And so, I was really excited to be running a business. I didn't know that was going to happen, and it all just kind of it did. And so I worked a lot, and having a kid is much harder than running a business. I will tell you that as well. I did not know what to do with the kid, but I was like, I'm really good at this business stuff, so I would prefer to go back there, which might be a little bit different than what you always hear. And so we, as a family, decided to bring in a nanny, and she's been with us and is still with us today, 11 years later, and is an integral part to our family, and for my husband and I to be able to continue having really the work, I would say, that we both want to be doing, and keeping our sanity and staying happy and kind of fulfilled in those areas. So I would say, yeah, you got to figure out what it means for you. We had another child in 2012, and they've also just gone along for the ride with me. It is not unusual to see one of my kids pop up in the office and be around, and I've got pictures of them reading books and on iPads and doing all sorts of stuff around the office while I'm wrapping something up or doing something, and we just kind of integrate it and make it work. And that's the thrill of probably also having your own business, is you can make decisions like that and you can embrace that for other people. And I found that out of that comes a lot of loyalty and a lot of trust. The work that we do, we're in the services business, doesn't always matter when you do it. It just matters that it gets done and it's timely and good quality. And so we can have that flexibility for people, that want to, and it's kind of everybody has different things that they want to be able to do or fit in during the day. And I had some really good early role models on that, from a leadership perspective.
Thank you for sharing that. But let's move. Okay, fast forward 2020. I think it's recently has been an anniversary. Also March, COVID hit. Another huge, I would say, the greatest economical crash happening in the United States and for your business. How did you react to that? What were you doing? What happened when the COVID really hit? When this government started shutting down and all this starting happening?
Yeah. It was immediately like, hey, whatever your local people are telling you to do, everybody needs to do that. So, stay at home, do whatever it is that you need to do to stay safe and help your family, and let me know what that is, right? So immediately it's just like, okay, is everybody okay? Where are we all at? Can we all work from home? That, can I help? It was like, hey, can I order an extra screen? Can I get this? I need a desk? It was like all these insane times as people are going home, and some living in very small apartments and trying to figure out how to do this. And, it's to the point of earphones and all these things that we just weren't necessarily equipped at home with. And so there was a lot of that on the team. And at the same time, we had clients going, oh my gosh, all these things that we're doing, we now have to move them as fast as we can to being online and digital for our workforce, because our workforce is at home. So we had, we've been really fortunate throughout the pandemic that we've grown versus, having shrunk. I actually, in the beginning as well, took out the PPP loan and then paid it back because we didn't need it, but I had no idea. I just, you don't know. And a lot of business owners I know did the same thing because there were no guidelines. There was no instruction manual for how to get through a pandemic. It's very different than 2008 and navigating through that. I have an executive group that I'm a part of. So something that I'd recommend to anybody, I signed up for a Vistage group right when I had opened the office in Seattle. And that group is no longer with Vistage. That's like a forum for executives to get together, but we still get together once a month. And that became, immensely helpful for me in this time, because I was able to get insight into how everybody else was running their businesses or dealing with the changes themselves. what was happening economically in all these different fronts. One of the guys in the group is with an oil company. This was also like the crash of the oil market happened right at the beginning of the pandemic. So it was, just crazy to watch literally some markets just tanking and others taking off, right? I mean, Zoom went from like, I don't remember what it was, some odd million customers to like 600% more customers in the span of like 3 months. It was just insane. And so being able to have people to help navigate through that and be like, what are you doing about this? Because my people needed guidance and clarity and as much direction as possible because everybody was dealing with the ambiguity. And I needed a place to go and bounce what I was thinking off of other people that were not my people so that I could come back and lead, and give that clarity and guidance. And it was really challenging. And, it continues to be very challenging, honestly. And I think we all have seen this while we've grown, and that's been great. We're all getting burnout. Productivity is super high, but people aren't going anywhere. We're not connecting with people. We're sitting in front of videos, all day and getting fatigue over that. There's sensories in our body that look for the body, for the cues back from somebody, and via video, it doesn't actually fulfill that like in-person desire. So your body's just like constantly churning, which I think is really fascinating. I have people with kids, I have people without kids, I have people that live alone. Like all of those things provide challenges, and it doesn't all happen at one time because everybody's different, so we just talk about it's like some people hit pandemic walls one week and then they're fine the next week. And we just kind of have to roll with that and this constant checking in and where are you at and how are you doing? One of the uplifting parts for us is that we've been able to hire some people during the pandemic. And that's been awesome because that's, not the space that every company is in. And so being able to provide employment and work for people has been a great aspect of where we're at. But yeah, I mean, and it's still week by week. In fact, we were just saying right before we started that Inslee just opened up or just kind of laid down the law about schools going to a hybrid model starting in April for K through 12. And there's a lot of parents out there and kids that are really, really, really struggling. And helping those parents during this time is just, it's hard. It's hard to watch.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing this information with us. Thank you so much for answering all our questions. We have some more coming. I actually forgot to ask you one question also about the oxygen acquisition. So what was your thought process? You kind of mentioned that, okay, everything was falling. You had to, the English office had to go bankrupt. You were the part of this decision-making process of having this office let go. But what motivated you to actually take the situation in your hands? Because it's a really risky deal, and like it really shows like your strengths, like internal strengths, and like bravery, like just to take this all in your hands. What was going through your head? Because some people may think like, okay, so this whole crap is going nowhere, so yeah, I better get out until I can. But you on the other side, you're just, no, I need to take it all in my hands, and I need to take it out from this ashes and just to the blossom. So what was your thought? Did you decide to?
Well, so it's interesting. I've been asked that question a lot across my career. And at first I didn't understand why people were asking me. I was like, well, of course I was going to buy it. Why wouldn't I? Like I had sales going and I had people that I'd employed, and what were they going to do if I just closed the office? Everybody's going to be out of a job, and it's 2008 and 2009, and there aren't a lot of jobs out there to be had. So I've also been told throughout my career, and I would say in the latter part, that I'm a very high risk taker. Didn't feel very risky to me, but for others, it could feel very risky to do something like that. I think having confidence that you can do something, I felt really strong about what we were doing. And I do and continue to have a very large passion around, at the core of what we do is upskilling people when they're out of the school environment. And that's becoming more and more important as we move faster, need to upskill our workforce, like all those things. And I think that a lot of the learning that's created is really crappy, to be just very blunt about it. And it's boring, and everybody's just like clicking through it to try to get to the next thing because it's so terrible. And I think if we can provide learning that's engaging and people want to do and actually makes a difference to somebody at work, like that's at the heart of it. That's why I do what I do. And it's definitely the passion that I have. I want to get rid of all the noise that's coming at people and all the bad stuff, and try to have really amazing learning experiences on the job. And so, I think having that passion for what you do is essential, because then it doesn't feel so risky. And I remember my husband at one point, he said, I ran into a quote the other day that said, "It's not risky to own your own business. It's risky to put your career in the hands of somebody else." But, oh, that's interesting. So there are different kinds of risk, and it depends on which one you want to take. I also didn't, I was in the large companies, and there are so many amazing people in these large companies that are smart and driven, and I just didn't fit. I didn't fit in that environment. Not because I don't think I'm smart. I don't know. There was just a difference for me, that it wasn't as fulfilling as it can be for others. And my husband's an example of that. Man, he can manage and do the whole large company thing so extremely well. And it just was never that interesting to me. So I think, taking the risk, the other thing, if you look at it from a financial standpoint, and I look back and I look at how much I paid for oxygen, it is by far the best investment that I've ever made in my life. So that feels pretty good.
Oh my God. You're just a very fascinating guest. You're like pretty sure everybody here should feel inspired and is feeling inspired, but I feel like I'm the most inspired here. I'm really motivated now. But like the question that I have now is such an inspiring, brave, and strong woman. What inspires you, and what is your vision and mission in a way? Why you do what you do, and what inspires you to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think people do, generally speaking, and I think I have a very high empathy for not knowing how to do something and feeling like you should, and that's a really kind of uncomfortable position to be in. I think I was that kid a lot learning growing up, where I was like, everybody else seems to understand this, but why do I not get it? And I don't think it was that I didn't get it. I think a lot of people just didn't understand and were too scared to ask. And so, when something's so kind of like ingrained in you from that standpoint, you have to follow it and figure it out, and and really lean into that. So I think we're all driven by something, and I would say don't be scared that it's different than what other people might be doing, because that's basically the definition of an entrepreneur. And doing that, and taking it on and trying to understand it, and really, I find way more passion in my work than I've seen from a lot of people that, go to do something that they feel like was the thing they're supposed to do versus the thing they really wanted to do. And so that drives me. I also, I get really curious about how things work and whether I can do it. And I like to dive really deep into how something actually operates, and then make it work. And so for me, having a business, and having the ability to to control the vision and where it goes is super fun. I'm like, I haven't done this in my life. So I've decided, like, we went and created a technology because I was just curious, like, how does it work? Like, to your point, I don't code. I don't know how that works. And you have to find people you trust to be able to do these things. But we created it, we deployed it within a customer. And that was such an amazing learning experience for myself. And so, when you have your own company, you can constantly challenge yourself And I kind of have this insatiable curiosity about why people do the things that they do, how businesses operate in different ways. We're looking at different business models right now to start implementing, which has me all jazzed up about, offices in different countries and things like that. It's, not everybody gets to go do that. So I feel super fortunate that I'm able to go and learn these things and then share them.
Thank you for being here. I just don't know what else to say. Such an amazing guest. So the question that I have, in the beginning of the meeting, you mentioned the importance of adaptability and being able to see the change and adapt to it. What are some of the opportunities that you see right now, maybe for your personal self or for Oxygen as the business, just something that you see right now would like to explore?
I just had one of the people that reports to me go through an AI class at Kellogg. And she's come out of that, and we've been talking a lot about what we can do with AI in our business. That's exciting. It's coming. It's here. It's not very good yet, but it will be. And so, that's some of the things that we're looking at. There's a number of different areas, and I kind of, I do this as well. And I think probably a lot of entrepreneurs do. You start a lot of things within your business to see what is going to work. I have just brought in a partner that I've known for a very long time as well to build out a marketing component to what we do, because we do a lot of sales enablement, and sales and marketing are getting closer and closer together. Like I said, we're looking at another office in a different location, in part because I think you can find such amazing people in different countries. I've had that experience, and I think it adds a richness as well to your own business and to the people that work for you. And it starts to link that global connection that we're in regardless. So, those are the three main areas that we're forging ahead on and figuring out. And, she came out with the idea on the AI that we've been actually molding from a technology standpoint in a different way. And then seeing this component of how AI can layer on top of that is really fascinating. And her professor was like, I'm pretty certain you could get funding for that. So that was a pretty good, mark of there's something there. And so we're going to investigate it. So I would say those are the things that are kind of fresh for me. And I'm sure you guys are all thinking about as well, what can technology do to make our lives better? I think the other thing that I would just say as you're looking into what it is that you're going to be doing is don't forget the people component to it. While technology is amazing, it's not amazing unless the people are involved and somebody's using it.
That's a really good insight. And we have just a couple of more minutes before we go to the student questions and audience questions. But before that, there is something that I just feel I must ask you. How can you define a leader to us? What do you think some of the habits of a leader? What should a leader what should he have or she has as habits, strengths? What is a leader?
I think there's a lot of different kinds of leaders. And I would say the person who I kind of turn to from a leadership perspective right now is Brene Brown. She's all over the place. She's doing loads of podcasts. She's doing both business and personal. And what I love is that it's all steeped in research. But I would say ultimately for me, from a leadership perspective, it's you got to listen. You need to be really clear. And that was probably one of my biggest takeaways from her a number of years ago. She says, clear is kind. It doesn't mean that clear always feels good. It just means that being clear to people is better than maybe making things seem a little bit better than they are, or seem worse than they are, or, whatever it is that makes us feel more comfortable. And I will say, having followed her and trying to practice a lot of it, it's hard. Clear takes time, again. So I think leaders give people time in order to create that clarity. And the ability to communicate and juggle, all these different things that are happening in a really humanistic way, in my mind, is a really strong leader. I think those are probably the main components. I can tell you about a lot of bad leadership if you're interested. We all probably know that.
Well, that's a good idea. Maybe I would find something in myself. So what is the bad leader? Maybe like not a gay itself will say, okay, Dima, you need to listen to this one. So what's a bad leader here?
You see interrupting a lot, dismissing people, dismissing ideas without asking more. I think being curious about where people are coming from and asking the next question, the next question, the next question. In fact, there's some amazing improv. I've done a bunch of improv, so I would encourage you all as entrepreneurs to go do improv, because it really helps you listen to other people's thoughts, even when they're like way off from where you're at, and just understand where they're coming from, because there might be something there. But I've seen the gamut of just, I'm a woman in business. I've seen leaders not want women around or treat even myself poorly. It just comes with the territory. Or it did. It's slowly shifting, although it's still slow. It's still a slow needle. I've been dismissed a lot, and I think that's probably one of the things that has been the most disheartening, I would say, is the worst about leaders is when you dismiss people. It's just not warranted.
Okay,
I don't want to talk about it anymore.
Yeah, I guess I'll have a talk with my officers about that after the meeting. So please, audience, anybody who is here, students, staff members, whoever wants to, please feel free to start putting your questions into the chat. Or you can just raise your hand, unmute, and ask your question, or you can put it into the chat and we can read it out loud for you.
So I have a question. So first of all, I want to say thank you so much, Juliana, for answering all our questions. And I think to comment on your last response to the last question, I think you should give opportunity to whoever comes up to you, because everyone has, I think, different characteristics and everybody has a different talent. So you should just give a chance to people. So thank you so much for sharing that. And my question is, what are some operation and key aspects that you implement in your business for business success? So like, what are some elements that you implemented in your business to make it grow in a time where the economy was not growing?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say we've done this a number of times, and when the economy is not growing, the biggest difference in my mind is that when the economy is strong, you don't really have to shape demand. Like, you don't really have to do as much work in talking about what you do or having the meetings and understanding where people are at and doing all of these different things. And in an economy that is down, you have to shape the demand for yourself. That's a totally different sales muscle and strength. And it's way harder to do that than it is to take in demand as it's coming in, and people are calling you and or buying all of your stuff. And so I think that is something we've been very successful at over the years, and it's allowed us to run through these peaks and valleys that you go through as a business. And come out of them each time. So I think really understanding those, that they're different, and that one, if you're not having to shape the demand, you're having to operationalize, if you're in a services business, you're having to operationalize the people, the influx of SOW writing, all the detailed side of it. Versus when you're shaping, you're really out there in front of customers and you're having X amount of calls and you're doing the outreach and you're doing the marketing side of things, a lot heavier than when you're kind of in a flywheel of work coming your way.
Thank you very much for answering my question.
Yeah.
And we have Itzel. She raised her hand, so Itzel, feel free to ask your question.
Thank you. I won't take long. I just want to tell you, like, wow, I'm so proud of you. I cannot believe that you had your baby, like, and after 2 days. What happened after the second baby? I'm just asking. You don't have to answer, but you have an amazing story that gives me hopes, because yes, that's something that I want to explore too. And I'm doing it, having my own business. And sometimes you feel like, I don't know if I can do this. So you give us hopes and strength and very good advice. So thank you. And then you said that you're also a native Indian, right?
I am, yeah.
Wow.
We are Choctaw from Oklahoma. So I was born in Oklahoma, but not raised there.
Wow. Well, thank you again for being here. I'm 9 months pregnant, still working.
Good for you.
So, thank you. Couple of weeks. Thank you.
That's awesome. Congratulations. Yay, more babies. That's what everybody needs. Our nanny just had a baby, and she started coming back just this month, and she's bringing the baby with her. It's amazing. Such a treat.
Okay, thank you, Itzel, for your comments. And we have, I think Kay raised her hand before the question in the chat. So Kay, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, I really enjoyed your all your advice that you had, and I was thinking, as an upcoming woman in business, what would you say is something that you wish you learned earlier? What is good advice for being a woman in business that you can give me?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've reflected on that a lot lately because I did not do this, and I'm like beating myself up, but it's a little late for that. You need to make sure that it's known what your intent is. So if you are growing your business, if you are having, I had a lot of people say, it's so amazing that you have this lifestyle business. And I was like, I don't know what business you're talking about. I do not have a lifestyle business, like the quote unquote lifestyle business where it's easy to manage and I'm not juggling a million different things with kids. That was never the intent. The intent was to grow a strong business and then potentially eventually go through an exit. So I think being really clear about what you want from your company and articulating that to people, unfortunately, especially to the men in your life, so that they're very clear, and your customers that are men, that you want to be challenged or given the opportunity. And I had a conversation as recently as a month ago with one of our clients where I said, I think that you've gotten the wrong interpretation of my business. And while, yes, we're really good at this innovative side, we can also scale and compete in that space. And I want you to know that I want to be a part of the RFP. And she was like, okay, I get it. I didn't know that. And I said, yep. So I just wanted to make sure you knew that. And she was like, I now know that, and you will be given the opportunity. I said, I want the opportunity to lose or win, but I don't want to be not invited. And she was and that made it very clear. So make sure you say it. I assumed people knew. I was like, I bought a business out of bankruptcy and like, I'm trying to grow it. I just assumed people would understand that I wanted to grow a much bigger business. And that was not the case.
Thank you. I think that isn't just like for women in business. I think that's just also something for everybody. That's pretty good advice, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, I'll just tell you, I would agree. And I went through and I said, who have I competed with at this company over the years? Now I'm just curious. What do the other CEOs look like in these companies that have won so much work and I haven't been invited to these types of deals? And I listed about 14 different companies, and they all had white CEOs that were men. And it was actually a little bit like I'd been punched in the gut when I saw that. And I thought, oh. And I talked to a lot of different people in my network about it. And I said, what did I miss? Like, how did I not do this? And I said, why do I feel so angry about it? And one of my friends or colleagues, I should say, said, because you're a terrible, spiteful person and you don't want anybody else to succeed. She goes, or the deck's stacked. And it was like, yeah, the deck's stacked. And so we have to unstack the deck, and there's room for everybody.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Kay, for asking a question. So we have a couple of questions in the chat. So Aurelia says, thank you, Juliana. And the question is, how do you combine healthy lifestyle with being full-time in business?
It ebbs and flows, and you have to figure out. So define what a healthy lifestyle is for you, and then try to stick by it. I'm up early. I get up every morning just about early, and I work out before anybody wakes up. It puts me in a good mental state. It makes me feel way better. Everybody's happier. That's a huge component of what I do. I will say during the pandemic and all the things that are going on, Daily Harvest, which is like a frozen healthy meal delivery, has been my lunch savior because I rarely have time to eat lunch, So you got to look for those different options and fit it in. And also, I think Margaret Thatcher said, you can have it all, you just can't have it at one time. So, any time of where you're at in your progression, figure out what's the most important to you and make sure you keep those few things. And it's like literally like 2 or 3 things at a time, because sometimes you just won't be able to do it all. And then be consciously know that you're giving up something when you do it so that you can bring it back again.
Thank you for answering Aurelia's question, and thank you, Aurelia, for putting the question in the chat. She left already. Probably she has some work to do, but she also asked a question: where can she get a nanny like yours?
I don't know. I haven't had to look in so long. She's so amazing. We were connected with her and just got very lucky. She was very young when I found her, and that was helpful, I think. And the one thing I would say is that if you're a woman and you're going through this and you end up deciding to have a nanny, my best friend gave me some of the best advice of my life. And she said, you can be cheap in every area of your life, but not with your nanny. And so I treat my nanny as I would an employee, and I give her time off and I pay her during that, so that's one of those prioritization things. And we prioritize that with our kids because you want somebody to just love them when you're not there.
Thank you for answering this question as well. So we're a little bit over time, but maybe we have any last minute questions from students, because I have kind of last minute question, if it's okay with you.
Sure, go for it.
You mentioned that you're good at negotiating, and that's really where I've been looking for. So what are some tips to good negotiation? What's a good negotiator? Like just tips for negotiating that help you in your negotiations.
I'll give you a couple of very early on things that I learned that I found really helpful. How to redirect a question. So you just asked me, so say you were like, hey, Juliana, can your price go down on that? I'd be like, oh man, I can't believe you're hitting me with that kind of a question. What's going on that you guys need to have a lower price? So don't answer the question, but also don't just ask don't just say another question, because that comes off weird. So 2 things, softening statements. So if you noticed, I was like, oh man, what's going on? That softens the moment, and it makes it easy then to ask a question instead of answer the question. Don't ever answer the question. Always try to redirect it until you get to a point and you kind of feel that point where you're like, okay, I can answer the question now because I have enough information to be able to respond in a way that is beneficial now for everybody, not just them or me. So learn softening statements. And it took me, when I first learned and then the art of redirection is what we call it, how to redirect the question. At first it sounds really clunky when you do it. So I recommend practicing on friends and family first, and then practicing in a business sense. But the ability to really understand where somebody's coming from and to negotiate from a level of having all the information is way stronger than trying to just answer the question, because it's rarely just the question. I found it's very layered in negotiating. But just and challenge people. Don't be afraid to challenge them and be like, I don't understand why you would want to do that. Like tell me more. There's so many good things from a negotiations technique. I can tell you too, when I was nervous about a negotiation, especially with large procurement, when I would go in and we had face-to-face meetings, I would wear very high heels. Just help me. It's like, what's your power thing? Like, when you're going into a meeting, what makes you feel good? Do that.
Okay. And how did you learn that? I know Chris Voss is a good resource that gets referred to as a good start in negotiating. What's some other places where you learned that?
Ironically, I learned a lot of these things. So there's a book called Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play by Mahan Khalsa. Probably the best sales book I've ever read. It was bought by Franklin Covey, ironically. I recommend that to everybody. It's one of the first books I read out of business, and it just resonated so much. I had a great negotiations teacher in my undergrad, and I had a lot of fun. It was the highest grade that I got. So, there's something inherently that it's a strength. So for me, I enjoy it. And, you have to enjoy the spar and not get intimidated by it. I think one of the things from a sales perspective early on that was helpful for me as well was like, hey, people have needs and they can either buy from you or they can buy it from somebody else. Because people are going to spend money. So that helps me from a mindset of like, they're going to spend money with somebody, and I would prefer it be me and not somebody else. So I'm not selling them. I'm giving them something that they need in exchange for some money.
Okay, thank you for this advice. And like from your example, like I just tried to thought about, so what you did basically, so like it feels like when you're trying to answer the question right away, it feels like the control of the situation goes out of you, because you're just
That's
playing
right.
Yeah, you're just playing with their rules. But what you did is actually challenge them, which kind of puts you in the higher like controlling position. That's awesome. That's a really good advice. I love it.
Yes, I'm all about keeping an equal or in my favor power stance, right? So there's a lot to be said for saying no too. And Mahan Khalsa talks about that in his book. And it's probably some of the most powerful advice that you can do in a business situation is when you feel like it doesn't feel good to you and it doesn't feel fair, say no. And we did this recently, and it was super hard for my VP of sales. I said, you know what, this just doesn't, like, this isn't a good situation. Like, we're not being treated how I want us to be treated. So we're going to offer to gracefully exit, is what he calls it, how to exit gracefully. And we said, hey, these timelines that you have and the fact that you need this and that, it just doesn't seem like we're the best fit for you. I know you said you were going to go out to somebody else. Maybe you should just partner with them. And the person came back, was like, no, why are you walking away? I don't understand. And it was like, well, because we're not getting these things from you. And it opened up to be a very good dialogue that then we won the work and we did it, but we had to get some things answered. And if it doesn't feel good and you're not being treated how you want to be treated, it's an extremely powerful tool. And knowing, a lot of my decisions have been made based on the fact as I think of, if I didn't have any risk, what would I do? So if you didn't feel the weight of having to meet a sales target or having to do something or to feed your kids, or, how would you act? And that's typically the way you should act always, because it's authentic. Somebody's going to relate to it, and that's very powerful from a negotiation standpoint.
Well, yeah, I'm so sorry we got you 10 minutes over time. I know your time is really valuable. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for all those useful tips. It was really inspiring story, and I'm very glad to meet you today and to just generally know you. and have you today on our meeting. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much